This video will begin the new chapter on the age of absolutism. So this is the typed outline that you can either print out and fill in as you watch the PowerPoint recording, or you can just jot this down in its unfinished format and then go in and fill in the information as you watch the PowerPoint recording. Okay? You can see here as I scroll down, it's all of section 1. And then Roman numeral 2 begins here and it continues on to another page. So make sure for Roman numerals 1 and 2, you use these outlines. Now, the age of absolutism is going to take place from 1600 to about 1700. And in this chapter, we're going to be really focusing on the rulers that are going to be known as absolute rulers. So we'll start with first the western part of Europe, which will involve France and England, maybe a little bit of Spain. And then the eastern part of absolutism will be in a separate chapter, and that will go over information about Prussia, Russia, Austria, a lot of that information. So I did divide the two up so that it doesn't get all confusing thrown together. So let's begin with just a brief introduction on Roman numeral 1. You could see your number 1 says that an absolutist is one who has total and complete power to rule. So that means there are no obstacles in their way of maintaining their power. There are no limits to what they can and cannot do. So I want to ask y'all, is our President of the United States an absolutist? Which basically is asking you, do our presidents have limits? And you know the answer to that is yes, okay? They do have limits. We have a constitution that limits the powers of a president, and we also have checks and balance within that constitution. So if you look at little b, it tells you constitutionalism limits the powers of the king. So a king can't do just anything that he wants to do if there are limitations put in a constitution. And we don't have, we don't call our leader a king, but we do call him a president, and it's the same thing, okay? At this time that we're studying, most Catholic nations had absolute rulers. This is on your number 2. 2 examples of Catholic countries that had absolute rulers were France and Spain. Okay, very Catholic at this time, but not England. It says England did not. And the reason, it's not because the English king didn't want to be absolutist. Oh, we will talk about many examples who are going to try to be absolutist. But there's something standing in these English kings' way, and that answer is Parliament. Okay, Parliament is going to, on number 3, serve as the obstacle to absolutism in England. Okay, especially the House of Commons. So on your number 3, I've given you a little bit of room to write down some details about Parliament, because for some of you, you don't know what Parliament is, okay? So it's very important you write this down. It is a representative law-making body that stands between the King of England and total power, okay? So similar to our Congress, because just like our Congress, we have a House and a Senate. Parliament is made up of 2 houses. They have the House of Commons and they have the House of Lords. And y'all, the details for both of those houses is on your 3, little a and little b. So just make sure you're in the right spot on the typed outline. Major differences between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The House of Commons is mainly made up of wealthy people And those people have been elected into the House of Commons. Okay? So if you want to become a member of the House of Commons, you've been elected by the people of England that actually can vote. More about that in a minute. The House of Lords is also made up of wealthy people, in this case specifically nobles, and a noble would be someone who might be a bishop, a clergyman. So nobles can be leaders in the church, is my point. Okay, these are people that have a lot of wealth, as well as maybe they're a leader from the church. The difference, though, between House of Commons, House of Lords, is how you become a member. In the House of Lords, you have to be appointed by the king to your position. Okay, so that means the king can handpick people that he wants. And of course, it's usually going to be people that he believes are going to agree with him and do what he wants them to do so that they can get things passed as far as laws go. Now, you'll see a little asterisk under your three little b to again give you some similarities between the two. So where it says both houses had, make sure you fill in the rest of that with money and power. Both had members from the gentry, and if you are part of the gentry, that means you own land. So you're part of the land owning class in England at this time. And that brings up another key point about Parliament, okay? Remember, for the House of Commons, you have to be elected by the voters. Well, who could vote? It says in order to vote, you must own land. And then in order to be in Parliament, you have to own land. So you kind of see where we're going here, okay, with the type of people that are going to have these decision-making powers in Parliament, okay? They are wealthy because we know wealthy people own land. And so not only are those the people that get voted into Parliament, but those are also your voters. Of course, y'all, later in history, the whole requirements for voting, big changes, okay? It used to be only the white males. Then that's going to change. So far, we are understanding, hopefully, what an absolutist is. We know what could possibly limit an absolutist, and specifically in England, it's definitely Parliament, okay? So very important you understand the two houses of Parliament, how you can become a member, and what they each have in common. We're now going to move on to your number 4 on your typed outline, and I'm going to go over a specific example of an English king who definitely wanted to be an absolutist. That man is James the First. You can see here that he wanted to be an absolutist king. However, Parliament will challenge him as far as trying to be an absolutist. You know, they're standing in his way. They're going to try to do everything they can to keep him from having complete and total power over the people of England. Now, one way he tried to justify the fact that he should be an absolute ruler is with this first quote. Kings are like little gods on earth. This is your little a under number 4. So think about what James the First means by this, and make sure you're writing down that this was said by James the First. Kings are like little gods on earth. Well, if he's a king, he's basically trying to say, I'm a little god. And so this shows that he has a high opinion of himself, okay? And that he believes that people should do what he says, you know, for that reason. All right, another justification that James the First had in trying to convince Parliament and others that he is and should be an absolute ruler is the belief known as the divine right of kings. So this part is your little b under number 4. What we mean by the divine right of kings is very simple. What many kings, and not just kings of England, other kings in Europe were claiming this too, They claimed that God created the monarchy and put kings on earth to rule. So basically, what he's saying is that kings are above the law. No one should challenge them because God put them here on earth. And if you're challenging the king, it's basically saying you're challenging God. Okay? So basically, the kings are God's representatives here on earth. And who are you to challenge God? Now, this sentence right here, you don't have to write this down. This is just me to kind of conclude some things about, James the First, because I want to remind you that England is not, I repeat, England is not under an absolutist king. Okay. Now, James the First is going around telling people he's an absolutist, and he's trying to be an absolutist and that he can do whatever he wants, for the reasons we just said. But Parliament is going to stand in his way and try to challenge that, okay? So more about what happens with James the First in a later section, okay? But I just wanted to give you a brief introduction of absolutism and a good example of someone who's trying to be an absolutist but will be challenged, okay? Next, the next time we deal with absolutism will be on Roman numeral 2, and we'll go over France, because France, without a doubt, will have absolutist kings. Okay, the English tried. They're not going to succeed with absolutism. France will have absolute kings. So more about them at another time. So you are finished with Roman numeral 1. And like I said, the next video, we will move to Roman numeral 2.